Mysteries are one of the greatest tools in storytelling, even when you aren't writing a mystery story. Today we're going to be discussing how you can implement a good mystery, some places to go back to look about how they're written with some first-hand reading, and why some kind of mystery deserves a spot in almost any story. Even though it might seem like the concept of a mystery is pretty self-explanatory, I do want to narrow into something particular about them that is going to be the crux of our conversation, and that is what makes something actually a mystery in writing, rather than just something the audience and/or characters happen to not know. And the difference maker is that a mystery in storytelling is something that the audience is meant to be trying to figure out alongside the characters. Importantly, for something to be an actual mystery, it should be possible for the audience to figure out aspects of this mystery for themselves, without the only source of their learning about it being through the characters figuring it out for them. Just to give it a term, I guess, we're going to call these kinds of mysteries that demand audience involvement active mysteries, in that the audience should be active in trying to figure them out. An example of what an active mystery might look like, just so we're all on the same page, is who killed Lynette Doyle and why in Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. That is a mystery, because while Poirot, the detective, will discover the solution for the audience by the end of the novel, even if the audience can't figure it out themselves, it is possible for that audience to uncover it before it's revealed, because there are hints and clues scattered throughout the novel that the audience is just as capable at interacting with as Poirot. However, what will happen when the Nazis open the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark isn't a mystery in the same way, nor the kind we're really going to be discussing today. There's no particular intent for the audience to be able to discover exactly what's going to happen, other than maybe vaguely guessing it won't go well for the Nazis, nor is the audience given any explicit hints as to what this is going to look like when it happens. And it should also go without saying as we move into the discussion that the presence or lack of a mystery is not a measure of a story's quality. That latter example not being a mystery doesn't mean that it should have been necessarily, nor does it make Raiders of the Lost Ark a worse movie. But its presence in the Agatha Christie novel is obviously fundamental to that story. With all that digression taken care of, we can begin with part 1, degrees of mysteries. When I say this, I mostly mean that you should be thinking about how big the mystery is within a story. In detective stories like Death on the Nile, the mystery is the point of the story as its plot is revolving around it. However, take a video game like Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is chock full of mysteries, but none of them are quite the fundamental point of the story in any of its endings. There are 4 of those endings to the game, depending on who you decide to side with, and each of those endings, sort of with one exception, 1.5 exceptions maybe, these are all more primarily focused on things to do with the conflict between the 3 main characters and each of their ideologies. Yet across these routes, players can learn about the secretly completely insane lore of the world and start to guess at why it's actually set up the way that it is. And most of these are things that the game won't tell you directly and will only reveal to you if you're looking very closely. So while those mysteries in that game are not fundamental to the story and the game would still be good without them, they do enhance it quite a lot. They directly make the game better without supplanting the rest of the story. When my girlfriend, playing the game for herself, figured out that, spoiler, I'm gonna hold up my hand until the spoiler ends, Rhea is Saros, it was one of the most exciting moments of her playthrough. So when it comes to doing this yourself, I would venture that there are about 3 levels at which an active mystery can be part of a story, being plot mysteries, true understanding mysteries, and lore mysteries. Plot mysteries are the type you were probably thinking about when you clicked on this video, the types that define what genre your story is. These are typically going to be mysteries where their conditions are going to be well understood by the audience. We understand that in The Maltese Falcon, Sam Spade is trying to both locate the actual literal Maltese Falcon statuette and uncover the mysteries behind the murders that have followed in its wake. We fully understand what he is trying to do and why, and the focus of the story is on the process of uncovering this truth. Obviously, these mysteries take the most thinking out to work because they're the biggest part of your story, but it is counterbalanced by this being that primary focus of your effort. If you can get this part right, the rest of it, while still important, isn't going to hang you up as much. And fundamentally, if the main mystery of your story isn't going to be well thought out and interesting, then why are you writing a mystery? Next are true understanding mysteries, which are the ones I tend to work with the most. These are the types that your characters may not solve themselves and may not even know exist throughout the span of a story. They tend to exist, with the character's involvement or not, primarily for the audience to solve. Often they can even be dependent on information gained by the audience that any single character in the story wouldn't have access to. I'm calling them true understanding mysteries primarily because they aren't going to be solved for the audience, and if the audience does not solve it themselves, they will be missing something you find important to the overall story, but not crucial to understanding it at a baseline. These should be something that can be missed and still provide at least an entertaining story, but also do enhance it by a substantial amount if solved. This brings back our Three Houses example. Spoiler again, still gonna just hold up the hand and probably timestamp it. You can still enjoy Three Houses if you don't figure out the true identity of Rhea, Sedith, and Flayn, but you'd be missing out on a lot. And spoiler. If the story doesn't work at all with it unsolved, it's a plot mystery. If the story is not significantly changed with it unsolved, then it is a lore mystery. Lore mysteries are another type I work with fairly often. These are usually much smaller, if not always simpler mysteries intended for the audience to be able to work out in the background as the novel goes on. They aren't meant to majorly shake up a reader's understanding of the point of a story like a true understanding mystery might, but might still connect the dots for one who's particularly curious or invested in the world you've created for your story. Sometimes these mysteries aren't even necessarily intended to be thought about by a creator, but if the actual end product is done well enough, sometimes logical solutions can still be devised about them. An odd example that comes to mind here is that I do think Cormac McCarthy's The Road does have a solution to the question of what caused the world's apocalypse. That question isn't really important and has nothing to do with getting an accurate understanding of what the novel is really about, nor am I even certain there's meant to be a single definitive answer. But when I studied the novel, I came to the conclusion that it probably was the result of a nuclear war. The opening monologue very much gives that impression to me, as does the environmental devastation that we see throughout. I don't imagine this is a surprising nor unusual conclusion. Most people would probably at least subconsciously assume that when they're reading it anyway, and it's probably one of the more likely ways people consider the world could end regardless. But still, it does feel like there are breadcrumbs placed there to indicate that conclusion, even though it's never told to you. And if that's correct, it does enhance the story a bit for me. And even if it's wrong, the idea that it's there as something to think about still makes me like the novel even more. But with these three types of mysteries laid out, the next thing I want to discuss about them is Part 2, Awareness of Mystery. I've mentioned audience awareness of the mystery to a degree in that prior part, but it does deserve discussion of its own, especially because there are so many ways that a mystery can actually be presented to an audience, even if it is one of those plot mysteries I was hitting on earlier. And that's because, though the marketing of a story can kind of ruin this to an extent, sometimes the mystery can be both the main point of a story's plot, but also unknown to even be present, at least for a time. These can be really tricky to write because people are often going to know when they're going into something what genres it's going to fit. And if you're writing a mystery at heart, it'll be difficult to disguise that from the mystery tag or category on whatever marketplace it ends up on. Because this is kind of an abstract example, I do have something I've read that represents it, though I honestly don't know if it's going to make it any less confusing, and that is House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, which can only really be described as an amalgam of mystery and horror and a bunch of other things. But several of the mysteries that define the novel are not only not obviously even present when you begin reading it, but are also almost completely impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't read it, because everything is so contingent on a bunch of other things and assumptions that you can't actually know for sure. But before I lose my mind trying to talk about that book again, I'll give us some nice solid categories to describe how known the existence of a mystery can be to an audience, at least before its potential reveal, which are obvious mysteries, which is kind of an ironic title, I know, downplayed mysteries, and revelation mysteries. Obvious mysteries I needn't even say all that much about, as you probably expect, but they're still a category here. These are all the mysteries where you, the audience, very much know that this mystery exists as you consume the piece of media. You know you're trying to figure out who done it, and also often how they done it in a Sherlock Holmes story. Nothing wrong with this, but it's our baseline, so it doesn't really need anything else. Downplayed mysteries require finesse to handle. These are the sorts of things you'll be trying to feed into the audience's subconscious as they read something, while also trying not to draw too much attention to them. I've written a fair few of these, and it can be very difficult to find the fine line between in their face to the point it's very clear you want them to pay attention and so out of mind it might as well not exist. Writing them often incurs a cycle of, surely this is giving too much away, followed by, I haven't done anything to advance this in 4 chapters. Say you're writing yourself a fantasy story and secretly a member of the core group that it revolves around is a necromancer. If you're writing a downplayed mystery, you'd want to make it somewhat clear that there's probably a little something off or different about this character fairly early on. You're still trying to attract some attention and make it more realistically possible for the audience to figure out that this is the case their first time through the story. You know, maybe their skin's a bit cold to the touch, maybe there's some skull motifs in their clothing. Hell, depending on the frequency and application, you could even describe things as grave or grim around them. Usually people writing these kinds of mysteries are more likely to underplay their hand than overplay it. And that does make sense. If you have someone reading a mystery that turns out to be too obvious and they figure it out right away, you could never use them again as a beta reader to test the visibility of that mystery again. But if they don't even suspect that it exists, you can still have them go back through it with it ratcheted up a little bit and see what happens. These downplayed mysteries are a lot of fun, especially as add-ons to a story otherwise about other things. They allow you to, if done with care, allow the audience to reap the rewards of paying attention by figuring them out as they go along, which is the best effect you can have on an audience with any kind of mystery. It's the revelation mysteries where things get a little tricky. When done wrong, these can come off as plot twists for plot twist's sake, unjustified, or at worst, BS. These are mysteries that you are making an active effort to keep invisible to the audience. But there is a very crucially important thing to keep in mind even with these revelation mysteries. If satisfying the audience is your goal, which in most cases it probably should be, it is still probably in your best interest for the breadcrumbs to exist somewhere. Buried under fallen leaves, perhaps, but present. They should still logically follow, if not immediately, at least after the audience has had some time to stew in it. Whatever is revealed should make sense. These kinds of mysteries are the other most likely to be incredibly plot relevant, alongside the very obvious ones, at least in my experience, though of course the line between a revelation mystery and a downplayed mystery is pretty blurry because I just made up these terms for this video. I'd like to give an example of what a revelation mystery might look like, but of course due to the nature of a revelation mystery, I can't even tell you what the spoiler will be for without the sheer existence of a revelation mystery within it kind of being a spoiler. So here's how I'll phrase this. I'm going to spoil a pretty well-known horror game that came out in the early 2000s. If that sounds like something you've been meaning to play but haven't, skip ahead. Hopefully that worked. Anyway, the game I'm spoiling is Silent Hill 2. You have very little to go on in that game just in general, about almost anything that's happening to you. You don't know why you're in the fog, you don't know why these monsters exist or why only a few other people are here and seemingly incapable of explaining why, and a number of other things. And because there are so many mysteries you're trying to work out at once, all while James seeks his wife Mary, the sudden revelation in your old hotel room that you, James Sunderland, killed Mary comes to most as a complete shock, especially if you're going into the game blind like I did when I first played it. The hints do exist, and it isn't impossible to figure out that this is the case beforehand, but they're so subdued, rare, and require such careful searching and attention paying that it's quite unlikely you'll figure it out. And yet, when it is revealed, it does make sense. It does connect the dots you didn't even realize could be arranged into something, and that makes it all the more crushing. There are also a million other mysteries in that game, and as a slight self-plug, I made a video on it on my other channel if that would be interesting to you. Anyway, you might wonder how you can pull off a revelation mystery without evoking that feeling of BS. So far as I've experienced, the biggest thing that makes the difference is that while you can have leads that point away from the existence or eventual conclusion to the story, in that they distract from it or might lead to other things, establishing any concepts or facts that actively contradict your eventual revelation is where the problems come. To use that earlier example in vague terms, because I really don't want to put another spoiler warning in here, if we'd already received convincing evidence that that person died in a very entirely separate way to what we eventually discover to be true, then the eventual reveal would probably have come off very different. Though, given the nature of that particular piece of media, establishing anything as convincing evidence early on would be quite a task. The only other thing to watch out for to avoid these kinds of mysteries feeling too out of left field when they're revealed is to make sure that the dots one can connect, even if it has to be in retrospect, to figure out how it happened, actually do exist. I've encountered the rare story here and there where there's absolutely nothing pointing towards the mystery's eventual conclusion, and potentially even a variety of things that directly contradict it. But because the audience is justifiably, in reality, not expecting that conclusion, the author feels like they've gotten one over on the audience or that they're smarter than them.
I wrote this mystery that you couldn't figure out. That means I'm smarter than you.
But with all this talk of leads and clues and hints, it'd probably be good to actually discuss a little bit about what those might look like in Part 3, establishing clues through character. Naturally, there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of solution for every kind of mystery, but there are certain tendencies one might lean into in order to pull the audience in certain directions. It's also worth keeping in mind that regardless of which of these ideas you use, the frequency with which they are presented can be as important as what the clue actually is. But for our purposes today, I want to really focus on how you handle your characters in a mystery, because they can be the trickiest to get right. And yet, doing your characters right in terms of their mysteries is arguably the most important type of clue, especially when dealing with a mystery centered on a crime or murder or something like that. There are also a lot of traps in this department as well, from what I've noticed, but we'll get to those. With characters more than any other type of clue, it's very easy to give too much away. If you say a character looks nervous in a mystery novel, then you are doing the equivalent of shining floodlights on them while a horn blares. This person knows something. This may not be the case in those situations where your audience isn't aware that a mystery is coming, and so the way you use characters to give hints to the audience about something is pretty dependent on their awareness that they're actually supposed to be looking for this sort of thing in the first place. The other thing to watch out for is buying too much into the common sort of what I understand to be faux psychological tropes that come around a lot in mystery stories. I don't have any background in psychology, so I'm sure someone knows much more about this than I do. But even I can tell that if a story is obsessed with little eyebrow twitches or touching one's earlobe or those sorts of little details that are meant to be subtle, they're often going to tend to not come off as subtle hints that something's off with someone, but instead hints that are essentially as obvious as just saying that they're nervous, but with a little more pretension, maybe. Not saying you can't do them right, but I've seen them done wrong more. In my mind and in my experiences, though there are many approaches to this sort of thing, the most important thing to be able to do is to write good liars. As a wise professor of mine once told me, as a writer, you have to be a good liar because writing fiction is just putting one giant lie onto paper for others' entertainment. And the better that lie is at convincing them it's worth believing, the better the story. The best lies your characters can tell are those that are almost the truth. And even better if they don't say things that are actively untrue, but leave out details that would make the truth clear. Say our character Bob Detectiveson is investigating Joe Doobatter. Joe Doobatter is a suspect for murdering a construction worker by shoving him off the scaffolding during his lunch break. Joe Doobatter did do it, of course, but Bob Detectiveson and the audience don't know that yet, and there aren't any direct witnesses. So tell me, which of these lies should Joe Doobatter benefit more from telling? Should he say that he wasn't even in the building because he went to the local Mickey D's to get a Big Mac, and when he came back, the worker had already fallen? Or should he say something more like, he was in the building, he was doing his job when he heard some sort of scuffle by the scaffolding, ran over and by then it was already too late. Neither lie is great, but it'd be a lot harder to prove he's lying about something with the second example than with the first. You can probably prove he hadn't left the site and hadn't been at any local McDonald's that day, but you will have a much harder time proving he wasn't just doing his job elsewhere in the building when the incident occurred. Yet, as said, these are imperfect lies, and the clues here exist in that you should probably just ask Joe Dobatter why he didn't see anyone else enter the building or do anything to stop them, or what exactly he was doing that left him so close to the incident but so unable to witness anything relevant. These are the kinds of places your mind should be going when it comes to writing suspicious characters. Of course, in mysteries that are less directly obvious to the audience, having characters straight up tell the truth, if only in fractions and somewhat lacking in context, can work very well. Sometimes this might come straight from a character's mouth, other times from narration. Spoiler warning for a book far older than anyone watching this video, Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. At least I am assuming none of you are 87 or older. You're told subtly on page 5, which is really only the third page of the actual story, that Carmen Sternwood is dangerous, and naturally, she turns out to be the killer for the novel's most relevant crime. She came over near me and smiled with her mouth, and she had little sharp predatory teeth as white as fresh orange pith and as shiny as porcelain. They glistened between her thin, too-taut lips. Her face lacked color and didn't look too healthy. There's some good lines, good descriptions, because on its own, you're probably thinking either, wow, they really make it that obvious, or that must be a red herring. But in the context of that page, which is full of descriptions of her and her eccentric personality, those pretty suspicious details can really kind of get lost in there. Among her literally unprompted falling into Detective Marlowe's arms, the predatory teeth get a little lost in the sauce. And ultimately, that's one of the main things to bear in mind when giving a hint in narration, to surround it with other details that will prove distracting from that hint. If you can balance that right, you can as good as say in the narration someone did it, and still have it glide right by. So hopefully all of that in the above has been of some use to you if you're interested in better understanding or writing mysteries. But anyway, I think that'll about do it for me today. I love mysteries as hard as they can be to write and evidently to talk about. This was a very confusing video to write, but anyway, that's all. If this sounds like a place you want to continue to be, we have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want it, where we post all our videos early. As we close out, I'd like to say I'm going to try and start posting every week again, but we'll see. And I'd also like to thank our patrons, Shadowrunner, Sani, Isaac Parrott, Raymond, Don, Sadako, Cavalier, and Sazami of the Knights of the Inner Circle, Vion and Jodion Void, our Knights, and Greer, TOW, Craig, Victoria, Lauren, and Noah, our loyal squires. And remember, this video is not a guide for how to lie nor get away with murder. Hopefully.